Hello, everyone, and welcome to another virtual program brought to you by the Orland Park Public Library. Tonight, we have Evolution of African American Music. African American music is filled with rhythm, melody, and innovation. We have Kelly Campos, who is an MLIS librarian, storyteller, and musician, and she is going to take us through a partial history of its evolution from its ancestral music of the motherland to the unique expression of African American experience. So without further ado, Kelly, you may take it away.
All right, thank you so much for having me. Like she said, my name is Kelly Campos, and I am all of those random things, and we're gonna get going with drums, banjos, and 808s. So at the heart of African American music is the groove. What it is and what it sounds like has changed over the decades and centuries, but it's kind of recognizable. It's hard to define, but it's easy to feel because by very definition, the groove is that unexplainable mixture of rhythm and beat and melody and tempo and heart. It's something that makes your body move. So as we get into this presentation, I want to start by introducing myself and explain a little more clearly what we're going to talk about today. So my family is a musical and theatrical one. This picture was me and my older sister. They got a piano, my two older sisters, and I did not get those lessons. And I always made up my own little melodies though. And then my oldest sister was a ballerina. So I took ballet too, just to be like her. And then I was also a theater kid, as proven by this photo here. And then once I graduated high school, I went to college for musical theater and became the lead singer for a rock band. Took a few years of classical voice lessons, learned how to play the hand drums. And because my djembe player left for California 2 weeks after teaching me my first rhythm. Then I became a main stage cast member at Second City, Detroit. I got married, moved to Illinois, had a kid, went back to school and got my master's in library science. And then I started doing storytelling with and without music. And here we are today. So one thing you'll notice is that I have a whole lot of hodgepodge experience, but I am not an ethnomusicologist. Ethnomusicology is a super interesting field, and the Swan system does have access to a range of books that touch on various aspects of ethnomusicology, but today is not this. It's not a deep dive into this esoteric information. It's not a college course, and there is no test. And also because I learned about these things by reading, I don't always have a reliable source for pronunciation of some things. So if anyone is from the cultures represented in this talk, please forgive me and correct me if I pronounced something incorrectly. But today we're just going to enjoy skimming the surface. We're going to hop through time from one point of interest to another, not always connecting the dots, but enjoying some things that I think are super interesting. At the end, you'll hopefully have some interesting info in your head and a hunger to learn more. And because I am a librarian, there will be a list of resources to enjoy that I will share with your librarian at the end, and she will be able to send that out. But that's a little later. So we're going to start with the roots, all the way back in the beginning. So the people captured and transported during the transatlantic slave trade came from a number of different ethnic groups. The Ga, Yoruba, Igbo, Eda, Fante, Ashanti, Madinka. Each of these cultures had rich civilizations that varied in language, religion, government structure, family expectations, and other characteristics. But there is a core set of constant features across West African culture that exists in the way culture is expressed and transmitted. And many of these cultures had a person or position responsible for orally transmitting history and culture, usually by speaking over drums. These were called griots or jellies, and this position had a lot of names in different locations. As a way to reinforce their power, though, the slave sellers and holders systematically destroyed connections to the most tangible aspects of culture. So specific languages and knowledge of cultural origins were forbidden. The name griot and jelly was stripped and largely forgotten for a time, but the concept could not be stripped away. And these constant features, the way that culture was expressed, those could not be suppressed either. So there's the tonal transmission of meaning through language, physical movement, collective participation, call and response, improvisation, a heightened focus on rhythm. These are all things that the people who were ripped from home could still hold on to together, and those things couldn't be taken away. So music and dance of the African diaspora simultaneously carries history and memory in a way that nothing else really does. Now in Africa, drums were used to communicate from village to village because they could be used to mimic the inflection of voices in a lot of different countries of Africa. As early as 1739 in the British colonies, drums were prohibited by law, and they were characterized as weapons in an attempt to prevent slaves from building community and inciting rebellion through these talking drums. So as a result, enslaved people played drum patterns on their bodies. Hands clapping, feet stomping, bodies and mouths all provided sophisticated rhythmic patterns. And you can see this in ham bone, which is an example of improvised body music. I'm going to play a short example here. This is from a blues concert that happened.
Hammer where you been, round the world back again. Hammer whatever have you heard? That's what the mockingbird. If that mockingbird don't sing, that's what the diamond ring. If that diamond ring don't shine, they get it back inside and down. If that diamond ring don't grow, that's the way you really go.
So you can see that this is a melding of two of the most visible contributions of African descended communities to the larger world, music and dance. And according to dance scholar Mamadou Diop, African music is always music for dance, and African dances are polymorphic, with the upper and lower parts of the body seeming to move to two different related clocks. And this is all a direct correlation to polyrhythm, which we're going to talk about in a second. But after looking at that short section of that ham bone, I wanted to also look at just the very beginning of this video about step.
When I step, it's a shout out.
So you can see that they're, again, very similar in terms of the rhythm on the body and using the body to create more than just a rhythm. All of this will be available to you afterwards so that you can fully watch these whole videos. That a lot of them are super interesting, but they were just a little bit too long to share all of them today because there's more. No. All right, on to the next slide. All right, so syncopation versus polyrhythm. Syncopation is a term that was developed to describe this effect in European music, that effect of polyrhythm. And white composers tried to quantify the complicated polyrhythms of African and African-American music in written form, ended up sort of simplifying those rhythms by thinking of it only as syncopation. So first we're going to talk about syncopation. So syncopation is playing a note on the secondary beat or off of the main beat. So if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, you can clap that beat if you want on your own at home. Syncopation means to clap in between the beat on the and. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's syncopation. Now polyrhythm is multiple rhythms, completely different from each other, that meet up at different times. So you can see in this illustration here, this top rhythm is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the bottom rhythm is a 1, 2, 3. So they meet up at different points of the rhythm. Another way of demonstrating this, which I think is a little more easy to see, is kind of a math thing. So if we take a pizza and we split it into 5, so that's 1 whole expressed as 5/5, right? Then we take that same whole and we split it instead into 4 pieces. So that's 4/4. Now, if we lay those 2 pizzas on top of each other, then that is a very cheesy explanation, excuse the pun there, of polyrhythm. So these things meet up at different spots, but they're completely different. So here's a much better, much more visual example. So this is a 5/4 polyrhythm. So that red is beating out 5 beats in the same time that the white is beating out 4 beats. So they always end on the 1 together. And that is a very simple polyrhythm. Polyrhythms can get super complicated with 5, 6, 7 different parts. And here is a more complicated example, which again, you'll see has those similarities to ham bone and similarities to stepping. And this is an example of current African polyrhythms. So I just want to pause. I'm going to restart this, but I want you to look because from this view, you can see their hands and you can watch to see the different rhythms that are going on at the same time. They also come back to that same, they're hitting on their chest, so they come back to that as their home beat before they branch out and do a different rhythm. These types of polyrhythms usually played on the various drums of each individual African culture were often the underlying musical accompaniment when a griot or jelly spoke to a crowd. So it's that same sort of thing. Now I want to talk about the clave. So the clave is both an instrument and a specific rhythm. And I've got one here. It is 2 wooden sticks that you often get in kindergarten because it's a very easy instrument to play. And banging them together gives you that ringing sound. So like I said, it's an instrument and a rhythm. For a rhythm, it's a 2-bar rhythmic pattern, and it came from an African bell pattern that came to the Americas aboard the slave ships. So they couldn't bring the bells with them for the most part, but they could build instruments when they got here. And so they used these sticks, which out of Cuban hardwood. Primarily, these claves started in the Cuban region. And since the slaves wanted to keep their music going, they used what they had. And so there's something called a 3-2 pattern and a 2-3 pattern. So that's the number of notes emphasized in the front half versus the back half of the measure. And we're going to focus on the 3-2. So it sounds a little bit like this. And you have 1000% heard it before. It goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So that is what a 3/2 clave sounds like. So now I'm going to play that again. Oops, apologize about that. I'm gonna play that again, and you're gonna listen to some things and see what you recognize, because there are a lot of modern and older songs that are based around this clave rhythm. There's a big chunk of time that we don't necessarily have access to in the same way, like we can't get a recording of these things, but this rhythm has definitely survived across time. And so some of the examples that we have that you will recognize go a little bit like this. So let's see. Lum-de-lum-de-lie, lum-de-lum-de-lie. So that's Smokey Robinson and the Miracles from 1963. Then up in 1965, we have this one. I want candy. And then let's go up to 1975. What a night. Late December back in 63. Yep. Then we go up to 87. Okay, here we go. Well, I guess it would be nice if I could touch your body. I know not everybody. Yeah, George Michael. Then let's bring it up to today's, or closer to today. I like that boom, boom, pow. Them chickens jocking my style. They try to copy my swagger. I'm on that next shit now. Black Eyed Peas, 2009. So you should have recognized a good number of those songs, and you should also now completely recognize that 3/2 song, or they call it a 3/2 son clave rhythm. It is absolutely everywhere in pop music, and the more you recognize it, the more you're going to hear it in different things. It's absolutely ubiquitous. So we talked about beat and rhythm, and now I want to branch out into melody, specifically the pentatonic scale. So although this scale of music is not exclusive to music from the African diaspora, it is definitely a major, major part of it. And it differs substantially from the do, re, mi, fa, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which that's a heptatonic scale. It's a series of 7 notes, whereas the pentatonic scale is a series of 5 notes. And it's super prominent in African and Asian cultures, although it is present in all cultures to some degree. The music of Africa and Asia leans heavily on a pentatonic scale. But I'm going to play this short video of Bobby McFerrin explaining a little better and illustrating how powerful the pentatonic scale can be.
Talking about expectations. Watch.
Ba, ba,
Okay.
So this video, it's not long. I'm going to continue it, but it's absolutely amazing to watch him manipulate the crowd through this pentatonic scale, which he has not talked to anybody beforehand or anything. This is just some cultural knowledge that we all seem to have. So having not talked to anyone in the crowd, and this is at a conference about the brain and science and I'm sorry, and neurons and how expectations influence things. And it's funny how that music, that pentatonic scale played right into that, and he was able to get everybody on the same thing. So like I said, that scale, those 5 notes are super prominent in African and Asian cultures. More so than they were in the regular everyday music of European cultures. So some people think that the Middle Passage stripped the slaves of their African traditions, and that the enslaved people were so powerless that they had little to no influence on American culture at large. But neither one of those things is actually true, and that's proven by the music of slavery. So it kept many, many African elements, and there was actually a lot of continuity in the instrumentation, because in some cases, enslaved Africans were able to carry small African instruments with them, but many times those instruments were reconstructed here with similar resources. So if something was made out of a hardwood, where the person came from, they would find scraps of a hardwood here and make a new version of that instrument. And of those Africans who arrived in the United States, nearly half of them came from 2 regions: Senegambia, which is the area comprising Senegal and Gambia rivers, and the land in between them, which today is Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Mali, and West Central Africa. And at its height, about 1 out of every 6 West African slaves came from this area. So when they got here, then they reconstructed their instruments, including an instrument that in present-day Gambia is called a konting. Again, I'm not positive on that pronunciation because I've only read it. There are similar instruments with different names from other cultures in the surrounding region, like the Ngoni from Mali. And using the materials and resources they had on hand, these instruments became the banjo. So here's what an ikonting sounds like. I'm going to take us up here.
Senegal.
So you can see in the construction of the instrument, in the way that he plays it, and in the way that it's tuned, you can't quite see this is farther down the neck, but this instrument is very, very similar to the basic construction of an early banjo and even a modern day banjo. Whereas the ngoni and the zalam, which are similar instruments from different areas in the region, those were instruments typically played by the griots or the praise singers that we talked about earlier. Whereas this instrument, the akonting, was typically played by ordinary people in the Jola tribe. So that is why many newer scholars are leaning towards this instrument as a more direct ancestor of the banjo than the others. However, nothing lives in a vacuum, and it was quite likely a combination of all of them, especially because people were being shuffled around and living with people who were from different African cultures than they were. So connecting this to banjos and modern day country music, then the uproar over Lil Nas X, Old Town Road, breaking into the country charts is rooted in the idea that country music is a white space, and it has this idealized view of the white South, including an old white man on a porch playing a banjo, which, as we all know now, is actually an African instrument. So that is ear hunting, and that is banjo.
This song is about
Here you will see some Black stars of country music, some modern, some older, and like Lil Nas X, not all of them are firmly in the space of country solely. They do or can explore and go through different styles, because that's what a lot of musicians do, is explore styles, not necessarily be trapped into one. And so these are some people that that you might be interested in learning about, and there are going to be things at the end or in those resources for you to look up. Now, in a recent Ken Burns documentary about country music, he spent a lot of time emphasizing that country music has always been home to African American artists. And he shows that just like in rock, jazz, and pop, every facet of country music, from its instrumentation of stuff like the banjo, to repertoire, to vocal and instrumental techniques, they're all indebted to African and African American traditions, but commercial decisions by white industry executives led to their exclusion from the genre for a really, really long time, and which then also led to African Americans removing themselves from the genre to large extent. But so the banjo, once it came over and was made with local instrument or local materials and thing, it eventually became standardized, and then it was appropriated and spread to white audiences through minstrel and blackface shows. And those minstrel and blackface shows really, really informed the rise of hillbilly music, and hillbilly music was later rebranded as country music. So Rhiannon Giddens, who is the young lady at the top in the color picture with the banjo on her knee, she's a fantastic singer-songwriter, and both as a member of a group called the Carolina Chocolate Drops and as a solo artist, and she can absolutely wax poetic about this topic. The Carolina Chocolate Drops was very much a roots country band made entirely of Black folks. Really, really great music. They are no longer together, but each of the people are still performing on their own, and they all are absolutely fabulous. And she gave a keynote speech about this topic, and some excerpts from that are in a PDF that will also be included at the end for people. So this is Lil Nas X up top. Amade Ardwan, 1929 to 1934. That's his album, bottom left. The woman in the black and white picture with the guitar sitting on the fence is Linda Martell, and that was from the 70s. And then Rhiannon Giddens. Ruby Falls was another Black female country singer, I believe from like the 70s as well. And then Charlie Pride. Of all of them, Charlie Pride is the only one who really was accepted into country music wholeheartedly. And you know him for the song, "Give me the beat, boys, and free my soul. I wanna get lost in your rock and roll and drift away." But he was a pretty well-respected country music artist. Moving on to the rhymes and the rhythms. So in a GQ article about the artist formerly known as Mos Def, writer Mark Anthony Green said, "Hip hop is an African folk art birthed in America. From the tonal languages that morphed into tonal inflections of rap to the polyrhythms that lay like carpet on the floor of hip hop and rap today, and the wild syncopations that are the foundation of many Southern rap songs, the call and response of live performances, it all has this twisty, windy connection to the African cultures that people tried so hard to hold on to." And to start the conversation about American hip hop, we're first going to go to Jamaica. So recording engineer Byron Smith forgot to include the vocals on a song called "On the Beach" by the Paragons. And the vinyl of that version without words was delivered to a DJ hosting a really popular party late that night in Jamaica. The DJ mixed between the vocal version and the dub version, the version without words, and the crowd went absolutely crazy. So that trend began to catch on in Jamaica. Again, that was the late 1960s. And other DJs picked up on the practice. And one in particular, in his DJ scene, he melded that technique into using reggae, jazz, gospel, and country music from America, all of which he played in his club. Now that DJ soon packed up his family and moved to New York. So when he moved to New York City, Clive Cool Herc Campbell was the son of that DJ. He was a transplant from Kingston, Jamaica, and in the summer of 1973, he held a party with his younger sister. It was a back-to-school party hosted on August 11th, 1973 at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. Cindy, his younger sister, wanted to earn extra cash for back-to-school clothes, so she decided that to have her older brother, he was 18 years old then, she decided to have Clive play music for the neighborhood in their apartment building so they could raise some money. And this is the extremely well-documented birthplace, day, and time of hip-hop. So Herc introduced elements of the dub scene from Jamaica, but instead of playing the dub records, the version without vocals, against a version with vocals, he would play two copies of the exact same record, and he would extend the break beats during his set, the beats in between the verses and thing. And he'd been practicing this technique for a while, calling it the merry-go-round, and he introduced it for the first time at that party. So this is a unique expression of the African diaspora. A Jamaican DJ, a descendant of people taken from one part of the continent to do one type of work here, playing music by other people whose ancestors were taken from a different part of the continent to other places, and mixing them together on one island, carrying those ideas far north to a completely different island. And the result is still going. It's influenced the entire world, as can be seen on all of the Billboard charts. When you look at Billboard charts from different countries, hip hop, American hip hop is up there all the time, as is homegrown hip hop. So like there's bands like Seed in Germany that are German rap groups. There's K-pop, which has heavy influences from hip hop and R&B. So all over the world has been influenced by this party that was held August 11th, 1973. Now, early hip hop music was entirely built on reinterpreting prior recorded works. So Grandmaster Flash at one time described what he and his contemporaries were doing as records with talking over it. And he doubted that people would pay for it. In fact, he was very hesitant to sell things at first because he's like, nobody's gonna even want this. So what is an 808? That's one of the things in the title, drums, banjos, and 808s. And a lot of people are like, well, what's an 808? An 808 is the Roland TR-808 rhythm composer. And that's what you see this picture here. It was a drum machine that was manufactured by the Roland Corporation between 1980 and 1983. It was one of the first drum machines that allowed users to program full rhythms instead of using preset patterns. So like if people of a certain age would have had a little Casio keyboard that has a button on it that says rumba and it plays a rumba rhythm and you can't change that rhythm. So this was one of the first drum machines that allowed you to create your own rhythm instead of using that preset pattern. So there was another competitor which was more expensive, but the 808 generated sounds using analog synthesis instead of playing samples of actual drum sounds. But the 808 wasn't actually really popular. Like people thought it had terribly unrealistic drum sounds, and that's why it only lasted a couple years. But it built a cult following over the 80s because it was affordable and easy to use. Then it became popularized by hits. I mean, big hits, such as Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye and Planet Rock by Africa Bambaataa. The 808 was eventually used on more hit records than any other drum machine. Its particular popularity in hip hop made it one of the most influential inventions in popular music. And it's comparable to the Fender Stratocaster and how big of an impact that guitar had on rock and roll. So here I'm gonna take this video and I'm gonna skim through so you can hear a few songs that have that classic 808 sound as the core. Again, 100% you have heard some of these songs and you may or may not have recognized that it was the 808 drum machine you were hearing. So Marvin Gaye. Africa Bambaataa. There is very similar rhythm, Egyptian Lover. Beastie Boys. And one you might not think of because it's not hip hop, Phil Collins. And one more. So there's a lot of songs that use that classic 808 sound. So when you talk about contemporary hip hop and rap, again, it's just touching our toe in the water of all the things that I could talk about. But the modern rapper channels the role of the griot or that jelly, transmitting information and culture in the form of rhyme and meter over instrumentation with an emphasis on polyrhythmic elements. So that's all that same thing we were talking about, those polyrhythms from the beginning. When a griot spoke, they would be speaking over the hand drums using those rhythms. We're using a lot of those same rhythms still, those same patterns of rhythms, those polyrhythmic elements, and speaking on top of it. It's just an evolution of that same thing. And doing a lot of the same thing with it in terms of talking about the things that are important to your culture. It's all the same. Verbal elasticity is super important in rap and has always been super important in African-American music. Being a cultural historian, testifying fluently, speaking with quickness, bending words and phrases, forcing rhymes with effortless ease is one thing that hip hop is all about. They find these rhymes in between the beats, in between the phrases, and they'll find two words that don't even really rhyme. And next thing you know, they actually rhyme. All of these are facets of music that have been happening for a really long time. But rap and hip hop has to be heard to be fully understood. And there's a really funny story about a white New York Times book critic who, after he reviewed a book called The Anthology of Rap, and he never actually listened to rap music, so he did not know any of the songs. He was just reading the lyrics. And so after using these lyrics, he was ready to name a rapper named Big Daddy Kane the best rapper of all time. So if you know anything about hip hop, you know that Big Daddy Kane might have been fun, but he was not in any way, shape, or form the baddest rapper of all time. And in fact, he named people like Wu-Tang Clan and Nas, who a lot of people think of as up there. He thought of them as just pedestrian, just kind of regular. So the NPR, National Public Radio, their music editor, Franny Kelly, steps in and she sent him specific songs to listen to. And then she interviewed him. And when she interviewed him, he said, "The moment I started listening to the songs you sent, I realized it's basically insane to make any kind of judgment about rap without hearing it." And that's because of those rhythmic elements and the vocal intonation and how much they change the words and the meaning and the feeling you get from them. And it's all about communication. One of the songs that blew him away the most in terms of the difference between the words, the written words on the page and the sound in your ears was Lil Wayne, his song, Dr. Carter. And in this short clip, I want you to pay attention to the way he says words. I'm not going to play the whole song, but the way that he says words, how he uses his breathing and his tone and his rhythm to communicate things.
Good morning, Dr. Carter.
Hey, sweetie.
Looks like it's gonna be a long day.
Another one. What we got?
Your first patient
Yeah.
suffering from a lack of concept,
Uh-huh.
originality,
Uh,
his flow is weak,
another one.
and he has no style.
Uh.
What you got for me?
Keeping my gloves on, and my scrubs on. Dr. Carter to the rescue. Excuse me if I'm late, but like a thief, it takes time to be this great. So just wait, your style's a disgrace. Your rhymes are fifth place, and I'm just grace. One no ace, and I'm trying to make your heart beat like bass. But it's sweet like cake, but I come to fix whatever you shall break. What is your originality? You are so fake, so picture me like a gallery. Capture what I say. All I need is one mic, all I need is one tape. Like.
So that is just the first 56 seconds. And if you read the words on the page or on the screen, if you read them without hearing them, you 100% would just think it was an average poem. But when you hear him, the performance of it fundamentally changes a lot about it. And that is one core thing of African American music in general, is that it is a performance-based thing. There's a connection between performer and listener that, again, that connects back to the call and response aspect of African-centered music. Because it's not a one-sided thing. It's not you get up and you perform and people quietly listen, which is what it is in the concert hall of classical music. You know, in classical music, they play, you shut up, you don't even clap in between movements. You just listen. African-centered music is not like that. It's meant to be interactive. It's meant for you to talk back at the screen. It's meant for you to say, yeah, come on with it. It's meant for that. Otherwise, it's not a full picture of what it is. So at the heart of African American music is the groove. And as a kid in Detroit, which is where I'm from, there was a joke the kids had about white music versus black music. And that was this: white music makes you bang your head forward, makes you do that. And black music makes you bop your head and your neck backwards, makes you do a stank face. So that's an oversimplification and a generalization that, of course, doesn't hold true for 100% of music. But there is a core of truth there, and it's very difficult to explain. But good music can make you do this. But really great African American music makes you put a stank face on and pull your head back. So hopefully you got a taste of some of the things that have brought us to today in the journey of African American music. And it is a very, very small sampling. But like I said, there will be some resources at the end of books, of CDs, of even a couple documentaries, things that you can explore more fully if you are interested in learning more. And I'm Kelly Campos, and thank you for coming.
And thank you. Sorry, I just kind of popped in. Thank you for giving that presentation. It was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Good.
I absolutely love having programs like this. This is my second year of working at the library, and I really wanted to have in February to have programs about African American history and just different things. And last year it was kind of a downer, you know. We meant like we're focused on like civil rights movement and everything. It was a bit of a downer, very informative, but kind of a downer. And I'm really glad that we were able to do the music one this year because it was so interesting. And it's lovely to see like parts of our roots, like how much it influenced today's music without people even knowing.
Absolutely.
And like when you were talking about the clave beat, the first thing I honestly thought of was I honestly thought of that first. I was like, oh, that's I Want Candy. And I didn't even know it came from that beat. And I am Black and a percussionist, and I had no clue.
Absolutely. I actually reached out to drummers in my circle because I knew that it existed from the music theory classes I had taken in undergrad, but I could not remember what it was called. So I'm like, guys, you have to tell me, what is that rhythm? What is it called? I need to know. So yeah, I had to put the call out to get the official terms so that I could have all my ducks in a row. But yeah, it's super interesting when you look into that stuff, how things overlap and go back and forth. And one of the resources on the list that I'll send you a little bit later is actually about the tango and the tango in Argentina. Now, you would think that has nothing to do with this presentation that I'm talking about. This is African American music here in North America. But as small as the African diaspora is in that region, they had a huge, huge impact on the tango. And this his music historian, dance historian guy, who I'm losing his name now, he catalogs how that happened and all the things that you can see. And he's like, well, this part came from here and this part came from here. And how yes, the Spanish influence and all that is there, but these key portions are actually African moves that were Europeanized. So like how the tango is very upright, that part was the European influence, but the feet movements and a lot of the movements across the room, those are all based in African dance traditions. And I was like, whoa, who knew? How cool is that? You know, just to find out these things, because it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, oh, this is an African thing. This came from Africa. Well, parts of it did. Parts of it did come from Spain. Parts of it came from the indigenous people that were there. And that's part of the beauty, is that when all these cultures were forced together through terrible, terrible circumstances a lot of the times, the beauty that came out of those melding of cultures is really phenomenal. And being able to recognize the individual contributions that these different cultures had, to me, is another part of the beauty of it.
Really interesting, and I would absolutely love to have that resource so I could share it
Yes.
with the library. We have a display upstairs of different resources. We have different books and CDs
Awesome.
of different things for Black History Month. And if we have those on the shelves and it's not already on display, I would love to urge them to put it out there, because I
Absolutely.
think that is just so important, because music is a fun thing. Everybody likes music. I mean, and it's just so fun to learn about and to see where it came from. And
Yeah.
especially because like I said about like how last year it was like, when we focus on Black history, we usually just kind of focus on all of our struggles, and we never
Trauma.
really like we hardly get to talk about the celebration. And music is such a like celebratory thing, and dance, it would be so cool to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have everything together. It's just not pretty, and I can't. It's almost against my religion to give out things that are not pretty. So I just have to prettify it, and then I'll send it over to you.
It's okay. You take your time. You got to make it pretty.
Yeah.
But once again, thank you so much for doing this. It was super interesting. I love it. As soon as it's posted on Facebook, I'm going to make sure to share it to everyone I know. I know a lot of musicians. My sister, unfortunately, couldn't make it. She majored in music,
Oh,
and I know
okay.
she would have absolutely loved this. And so I'm going to make sure to send this out for everybody I know, so they can see this and be a part of this, because this was amazing. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, and thank you everyone for coming. Sorry, I almost forgot to thank you guys. Thank you for coming. And as soon as we have our resources, I'm going to make sure to send it off to our graphics team so they could get it posted somewhere so everyone is able to see it. And I hope everybody has a good night. And if you guys are all in Chicago, stay warm.
Yes.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.